Darrell, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. This is, I really appreciate this. And my hope is that this is going to be a real help to people, that what you're doing is going to help break the stigma of addiction just a little bit, let people who aren't in addiction know what it's like, and let people who are in addiction, who maybe don't realize it, know that they're not the only ones. To me, addiction is just one of the many myriads of mental health stuff that the world is more and more struggling with. And I think it's fantastic that you're willing to come on here and help dispel some of the myths, and just telling your story is really appreciated. Thank you.
No worries at all. Yeah, glad I can help. I think it's really important to talk about addiction and to, like you were saying earlier, allow other people to see your story so they can have a connection, and see that there is a path to recovery, and it's not perfect at all. But that's the so shall I just jump into?
Yeah. Where did it start for you, or where would you start in your story telling of it?
I would. I mean, when I think about my addiction, it kind of takes me back before that to some of the things that I needed as a kid. So things I needed from my parents, or from people around me, which looking back now, I didn't know it whilst I was addicted, but being in the standpoint I'm at now, and being able to look back, I can see that a lot of it was stuff that I needed when I was younger, which I didn't receive. So that kind of turned into wanting to discover new ways to get some of those things I need, some of that attention, or some of that almost mindlessness, almost like getting lost, like to try and forget some of the painful things, from the past. So that, in the beginning, it just started off quite innocently, just like trying to discover, through drugs and through booze and through losing myself. But then quite rapidly, it becomes a bit of a crutch. And what started off with just being in the pub with my mates, and which is, I suppose, quite normal. Like when you can, you turn 17, 18, you're like, yeah, I can finally drink legally, which is quite exciting. But for people who have had trauma in their past, that can quite quickly lead to a lot of other things. So, other drugs, and other forms of losing oneself. And without a support system around you, you can really lose yourself in that. And I definitely didn't have a support system around me. So I started drinking with friends when I was like, pretty young, 13, 14, and maybe even younger than that. And with that was smoking marijuana. And but back then it was I just had a small group of friends who we did that with, and that was almost like a discovery. Like it was a nice moment then, because I was just getting high with my friends and having a nice time with them. But then as I got a little bit older and I started to lean on these substances a bit more, from when I wasn't feeling, from when I was feeling anxious or worried, the more I lent on these substances, the more the ground kind of slipped underneath me. And the more I kind of lent on them. It was this weird paradox. Whereas this thing that kind of, it gave me some sort of, it almost gave me a part of me that I thought I'd lost in the past. But then quite quickly I realized that was just, that ground was very slippery, and the more I lent on that stuff, the more the ground kind of fell away. And yeah, I would go drinking for days and take substances and not sleep for a very long time. It almost became like a competition between me and my friends to see who could stay awake the longest, and that is not good. That is not healthy. So yeah, very quickly, things like, the things I was trying to fill that hole with, I was trying to fill the booze and the drugs, this hole, that hole got bigger and bigger. And I didn't know why. I had no support system to help me realize why that was happening. What I got was just other people around me just saying, come to this party, because they wanted to support me as my friends, but they didn't know another way. They didn't know what was really going on for me, and same, I didn't know what was going on for them. Yeah, in the darkest moments, there was moments I couldn't even turn my head to look at someone, because my body was so paralyzed of anxiety and fear that it was I couldn't look people in the eyes. I was very trapped inside my own body, and even talking about it now, I rarely feel like this now, but talking about it now, you can kind of feel that, and that had a knock-on effect with my relationship. So I felt very alone. I couldn't get close to anyone, like family members, I pushed them away. Friends, I didn't think understood me. Trying to get close, romantic relationship, just would never happen, because as soon as I did, this fear would kind of would take over, and I pushed them away. Now that's more than just the addiction part. That's stuff that happened, when I was younger. But with all of these substances I was taking to try and fill that gap, just pushed me further and further and further away from the things that I actually wanted. Now, the thought patterns that can come in when you're in that sort of vulnerable, debilitated state, they are thoughts which can lead to really, really dark actions. So things like suicide, things like hurting other people, hurting yourself. Yeah, it's a really dark spiral down, which doesn't seem to have a bottom.
So that's really interesting, the way you're describing that, because a friend of mine asked me, said, I don't really understand addiction, but I have an understanding of eating disorders. And I said, well, if you think about it as self-harm, you think about it as something is wrong, something hurts, and we're destroying ourselves as a way to try to make ourselves feel better about the pain. To me, that's got a certain association with self-harm, with destroying if I destroy myself by ruining my relationship, if I destroy myself by throwing away my career, if I destroy myself by physically destroying my body, a little bit at a time, to me there's a commonality of self-harm or self-destruction there. And to me that sounds, that rings with what you're saying about this hole that just gets bigger. It's like somebody said, you're thirsty, and so you're drinking salt water. You'd think you feel like water would quench your thirst, but the salt water just makes you more thirsty. And so what you're talking about, making the hole bigger, trying to fill the hole, but instead of making it bigger, that's really interesting.
Yeah. I think, well, this is where all addictions have that commonality, is that it doesn't matter what you're using to fill that hole. There's still something there it seems to be something there that you need to fill, and it's almost like where again, when I'm looking back from the standpoint I'm at now, that I was lacking in something, like this sense of lack, which, because we're not taught how to understand that, or we're not taught how to kind of look at that and be curious about it, we just kind of go into this like, oh well, I'm into this mindset of, oh, I'm lacking, how do I fill that, with external things, things like food and booze, and then we kind of destroy this sense of self instead of building that sense of self. But we don't have. I mean, it's really difficult because when someone's feeling that, we don't really have a society that says talk about it like as soon as it happens, because when that starts to happen, it almost goes like no one knows, and you don't want to tell anyone because you're kind of told not to. Not that someone's specifically going, don't don't talk about it. But
society, there's shame, and
there's a lot of shame around it.
Yeah. Like I can make myself feel shame all by myself, but I've kind of got society helping me to do that too.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like when you feel that when you feel those certain feelings or emotions, like it's just compounded by the outside world as well. So you feel it inside, and then it's like all this stuff coming at you from the outside as well, which is compounding that. And it's for me, you either hit that bottom and then you realize I've got to do something about this, or you start to look for tools or something to help you like see, people use that expression a lot, don't they, like see the light, or like there's always this kind of image of like crawling back out of this hole. And that's what it feels like. It feels like you're just like in this huge, I nearly swore there, this huge well, and you're like crawling, you're crawling out, and you can see this light. But that to me is almost quite debilitating as well, because it's almost like there's no end to this tunnel, and this light just kind of stays there. But that's why things like this are really important, because once you see other people that have similar situations and similar feelings and emotions, then you're not like crawling towards something. You can just see something's there. It's just like, oh, okay, so then you can kind of you can start to take more action. And what I'm seeing more, and in my own experience, is that recognizing those patterns in me that I had, that started off from my childhood, and then spiraled into these really destructive addiction, which all stemmed from trauma and then addiction. The more I took responsibility for how I was feeling, the more I could see the links to my past. So it was almost like seeing that I stopped labeling myself like I have addictive traits, but I wasn't an addict when I was a child. So it almost created a bit of space between like labeling myself like this, I am this, and that was really helpful, because then I could, oh, I'm not that, so I don't have to like, well, there was just more space to be me, like whoever that was, like, try to discover that actual like.
It sounds like you're saying that by not defining yourself as addiction, it gives you hope and possibility that there's a way out of the addiction. There's more to you than just the addiction, and that brings hope. That brings options.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, for sure. Like, I think we can be an addict, like in a certain point of our lives, but we don't always have to be an addict. Like we can have addictive traits, but that doesn't define us. Like we're so much more than that. Um, and just by realizing that, like, because I'm only just kind of thinking about this now. Yeah, it just seems to give you more space to go, okay, well, if I'm not that, what would I like to be? And then you can make a more informed choice of what do I want to give to the world, and where do I want to go, which can help the people that have been in the same situation as me in the past. And for me, that's now helping people with not necessarily addictive personalities or addictive traits, but anyone who has depressive traits or anxieties or any of those things, because they're all linked, because we all have, without labeling ourselves, we all have anxieties and thoughts about worries about the future, and like anxieties about the past. But I think in society in general, we always like label people, don't we? We always like, you're this, that person's homosexual, this person's like liberal, that person's like whatever. That I really like the idea of kind of bringing, kind of going outside of those boxes, so especially with addiction, like we were just saying, we can have addictive traits and personalities, but we're much more than that.
That's really interesting. There's a mutual aid group that I'm a part of, and the way that the habit is that people introduce themselves is they say, "Hello, my name is so and so, and I'm an addict."
Yeah.
And I the way I choose to do it is I say, "Hello, my name is so and so, and I am addicted."
Yeah.
It's a really small differentiation, but I'm saying that to acknowledge that I'm addicted, but not to define myself completely by the addiction. I'm not sort of like declaring that this is my identity. Sounds very similar to what you're saying there.
Yeah, I love that, because I've just read in this book I'm reading at the moment, they talk about trauma and people with PTSD, Vietnam war veterans or World War II war veterans, and it's really interesting because when they're in their circle of people who have had similar experiences, it's much easier for them to talk about their trauma because they're labeling themselves. But then outside of that circle, they find it very difficult to talk about their stuff because they feel safe and everyone else is almost against them. So that safety is just within that circle of people who have had similar experiences, and it's really important to understand that, or to build that safety in yourself and not rely on others or label other, like people outside of that circle of safety, as the enemy almost.
Sounds like the other. We have this thing in humanity where there's us and them, there's we and them, there's the other and there's us. So an addict could get the benefit, or someone who's addicted, however you want to say it, could get the benefit of feeling like they're not the only one by being one of us in addiction. But then there's always, for every us, there's a them, and the disadvantage of identifying overly that we may feel more vulnerable or less confident or whatever, shameful, when we relate to people who aren't of that identity.
Yeah, exactly. I think it can create a platform for being able to talk about your addictive traits and your past experiences, but it seems a little bit limited in that I don't know, like I think you can get a sense of relief by talking about your stuff, but then taking action towards changing your addictive traits to something you'd like to, something that was more aligned with who you really want to be. And I think sometimes we don't have enough platforms that allow that, to go from talking about, because first we need to acknowledge it, right? I need to acknowledge all of my past hurt. I need to acknowledge the things that I've done to hurt myself and others. I need to acknowledge that I actually want to change that. But then, but then we actually need to go out there and we need to take responsibility and we need to take action, because when you can feel inspired to want to change, but unless you do something to change, you're not gonna go anywhere. Change isn't gonna happen by just saying how you feel, and saying how you feel is the first step, and acknowledging all of your stuff and taking responsibility for it. And almost this has been a huge thing for me, is forgiving people in my past who I felt like who have wronged me or who have led me down paths that I, to more addiction or to more pain. So when I started to take responsibility, first it was the acknowledgement part, talking about it, and then it was the taking responsibility part, and that's very hard because then you actually have to change. You actually have to do something about it, and yeah, that's when you actually have to expend some energy, and you have to put yourself in positions where you're seen. And for me, like, actually being seen was one of the reasons I started to drink and take drugs, because I didn't want to be seen. So yeah, once you acknowledge all your addictive personality traits, whatever, then you have to, then it takes courage, and you have to develop things like courage and just put yourself in positions where you actually have to change, instead of just kind of teetering on the edge, which unfortunately it doesn't get you to the place that you want to go. But we need support doing that also.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I really like the way that you break that down. Can I ask if you have a if you don't, then don't worry. But can you take me through a specific or a recent situation where you've had to use some of these concepts and some of these ideas in your own situation without being too personal? Because I'm guessing that it's not all sorted and completely done and dusted.
Yeah. Okay. So now I still relapse from time to time. So for example, recently, because of what's going on, and we're all at home, I had some sometimes you can be susceptible to old thought patterns coming back in, which can then lead to old actions taking form. So yeah, when this whole lockdown started, I was like, oh, I can have like a nice bottle of wine with my brother, and these kind of thought patterns started to occur because I had less responsibility from going to work. I thought it'd be a nice thing to do with my brother, and all of these kind of excuses started to come in. So there was a day when I ended up drinking 3 bottles of wine with my brother and his partner, and then I smoked, which I usually, when I'm sober, like I hate smoking. I hate the smell of it, and so when that happened the next day, because of the work that I've done on myself, through positive affirmations, through dealing with my trauma, actually looking at experiences that I've had in my past before my addictive phase before I was drinking and doing drugs a lot. What were the reasons I was acting this, or like why did these traits come about? And because I'd done some of that work, and meditation, when I relapsed, it was a much quicker process to come back to myself, to come back to the habits that I'd formed, which helped me move forward and don't keep me stuck and stagnating. So I acknowledged that I had relapsed, and I wasn't very happy about it, but I didn't get stuck in this mind frame which was beating myself up, which would then in the past would lead me back to taking the same actions. And it would just be this circle of just like, self-deprecation, feeling a little bit better, and thinking, oh, okay, I can drink again, I can do this again. And then it would just be like this cycle, blah, 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 blah. So now much more quickly, I can be like, right, okay, next morning, I'm going to do my breath work, I'm going to do my meditation, I'm going to do my exercise, and I'm going to start to build towards this future that I want. Now, that takes a lot of time, and that takes dedication, and that takes a lot of messing up. And a lot of people, because of society and whatever, we want things now, and we want to be able to be this person who we want to be in the future right now. And that's just not gonna happen. That's never gonna happen. We delude ourselves. I was that person. I was like, I want this now. Why can't I be this now? And then it would start the cycle of self-deprecation, blah, 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 blah. So we do need systems, and we do need structures to help bring ourselves back to the moment where we can hold ourselves and be like, it's okay. So it's almost like reparenting ourselves. And that is a huge, huge thing that I've learned, is like, no one else can do the work for us. No one else can hold your emotions or your thoughts. Like, you have to be the one to do that. And once I realized that was huge. That was like this moment where I'm like, oh, like, I don't have to worry about my dad or my mom or like my friends or like anyone like having to take care of me. Like, I can be the one to do that. But again, it took a lot of messing up, a lot of trying different techniques and tools to be able to get to the point that I'm at now, where I can, when I do mess up, quite quickly bring myself back to these structures and implementing these tools, which really help me thrive and bring a lot of joy and better connections. Like, now my connections and my, the people that I meet are more aligned with who I want to be. And sometimes that's actually quite sad, because I let go of the people in my past who I've had a big connection with, and sometimes they slowly drift away, and that's sad. But to live a life of like to live a full life, which is includes all of the negative emotions as well, like pain, pain I couldn't deal with when I was an addict, because I didn't have the structures around me to help me like feel all of it. And it's weird, because that's what you're pushing away with all the booze and all of this stuff. You're pushing away all of these emotions, which is what you're really wanting, is to feel all of it. That's what being a full human means, is by being able to feel the whole spectrum of all of your emotions, not just the good ones, but the painful ones as well, or the ones we label negative. And it's this weird paradox that a lot of people think when they're taking these substances, is that they've got to push away these negative thought patterns and these painful kind of things. Whereas when you can come away from the substances and actually be able to drop into these things we've been pushing away for so long that we start to realize that it's just part of being a human. And there's lessons to be learned in feeling those things, and it actually allows you to be more vulnerable and have better relationships, and just live more fully.
Yeah, I really identify with that. I can remember very clearly when when I remember once looking at my wife thinking, she doesn't know what this pain is like. She doesn't know how bad this pain is. And then something occurred to me. How do I know that her pain isn't as bad as mine? In my mind, I'm feeling horrible pain, and everyone else is living a lovely life and everything's great, especially someone who doesn't struggle with addiction like my wife. But this idea, well, maybe she has just as much pain. She just copes with it differently. She is able and willing to do something with it that I've never been able or willing or both to do. And that was a real important point for me, to think maybe I'm not the only one who has it so bad. And maybe, it's the way I'm dealing with it, and in some of the resources that I have, or some of the mechanisms, or the, whatever that I have.
When I talk about this stuff, it just seems to flow, and I become more eloquent, and it's like, oh, okay, great. This is actually what I'm supposed to do with my life, is to talk about this stuff, and therefore allowing other people to, like what you're doing, allowing other people to see that, and to have that emotional connection